place was years ahead of itself, but we grew up in it. But just such a beautiful place, great memories, the whole thing of growing up. Unfortunately, my parents were a little bit worried about the ISKL system. Being from Australia and having what they thought was an American education system, we went on home leave, and Dad said to me, you should go back to school, you need to go back to school. So I did. I spent a couple of days at school, and I sat in on an English class, and English is English, and Tom Clisholm is still, God rest his soul, is still the best English teacher I've ever had in my life. So it didn't matter whatever you took here, English was fine. I sat in on an Indonesian class and commandeered it and answered every question that they asked because the languages were so close between Malay and Indonesian. I sat in on physics, which was fine. In the US school, you do physics 1 year and chemistry the next, or chemistry 1 year, physics next. In Australia, you do chem and phys side by side for 2 years. So handled physics, lost in chemistry, but I knew I was going to pick that up the next year, that was fine. Math is also different. In Australia, you generalise and you do general maths for a number of years, whereas the American system has algebra, then trigonometry, then the different branches. So I remember sitting there in maths, and it's probably my own fault. I went home that night and I said to Dad, everything's cool. I said, but I was really lost in maths. So he said, all right. So we organised for me to do my 4th year Australian maths by correspondence, which I did, got through it. And at the end of that, Dad came home and said, the company's offered to send you back to boarding school, and I've accepted, and you're going. There was no debate, that was it. That to me was the start of the realisation, I suppose we had pretty euphoric, and yes, people came and went, but I guess in my nucleus of friends at that stage and the circles I moved in, you had a very, very close net. It was my life. I mean, we just lived, laughed, and had the most idyllic lifestyle. And then all of a sudden to be pulled out of it and say you're going home. And to me, that was the start of the realisation about what this transition and transient nature and the third culture kid syndromes and all those sorts of things really hit home. Because I went back to boarding school and I came back the first time 3 months later, and it started, oh, where are they? They've gone. Oh, where's so-and-so? They're gone. And it became that. Every 3 months I come back, there were more people who went. Yes, there were new ones that come, but of course I'm not in that circle, so it almost got down to the end where I had, as a 17-year-old kid coming back, a handful of friends, 4 or 5 people, that you just touched base with, that understood, you know, that you could work with, that you could do all those sorts of things. The other big thing that hit me during that time was exactly what I talked about before, was going back to school, to a boarding school. The boarding school I was at services Western Districts, Victoria, which is wheat farming, sheep farming, all those sorts of terrific Aussie stuff that they do. And they're country kids. And I would arrive at the boarding school having flown myself at the age of 15 from KL to Singapore, transited Singapore, got on a Qantas flight down to Melbourne, walked out of the international terminal to the domestic terminal, got a bus into town, from the bus down to the train station down to Geelong, caught a taxi up to school, walked in, threw my bags on the bed, absolutely exhausted, and all the kids would come and say, we're all going down the pub. And I'd say, what for? Oh, we're going down and get pissed. What for? Because you do that. Guys, 24 hours ago I was sitting on the 44th floor of the Hilton Hotel, watching the platters, necking Singapore slings, and you want me to go down, sneaking underage into a pub, you know? And that culture shock, bang, hits you in the face straight away. So did I assimilate? I had to work so hard to assimilate back into a culture that I grew up in, that I don't know whether I ever really fitted in. I had a very, very good friend now, Peter Dornbos, who ended up a very good friend of mine here in Malaysia. Bobsy twins, you just couldn't sell it. I'm sure we're joined by an umbilical cord somewhere on the line at one stage. Lived, breathed and did everything together. And Peter now lives in Sydney. Peter caught up to me after 20 years. I didn't have contact with anybody. It was like this thing that everybody in my life had been ripped apart, ripped away, taken away, and I just didn't want anything to do with it for a long time. Probably the worst mistake I ever made, I think, coming back now, and this is my first reunion, you just realise what a big part of life this was and how important it is. And anyway, I got a phone call one day, and I had a very good friend in Geelong called Peter, and he said, Tony, this is Peter. And I said, yep. He said, this is Peter. I said, yep, Peter Dornbos. Peter Dornbos. This is 20 years later. I hadn't seen him for 20 years. Where are you? What are you doing? So, of course, we did. We caught up. And I'm pretty sure the first night we caught up, about midway through the second bottle of Jim Beam, the tears started to flow. And it does, you know, and I could do it now. I'm an emotional person, always have been, but just the connection and the reality to say, here's somebody who lived, breathed and did what I did, that I can talk to, that understands what I'm talking about, understands what drives me. The M word, as Dana and Sheila want to call it. My family's the same. We have and always will cook satay twice a year. There are special occasions. We took the recipe home and I now spend 4 weeks preparing satay to feed an extended family that have no idea what it's all about, but just love eating traditional Malaysian satay. It's just such a massive part of your life that you can't understand. And as I said, my first reunion coming back just means so much to be able to connect with people and know that there is a network out there of people that do understand. I guess the only other thing, and I talked to a few of the guys that when the third culture kid stuff first started to develop and the term global nomads and all those sorts of things, Robert Gore, the principal here, one of his sons, his second son, Kevin, was at university in the States and did a thesis paper, and I'm not sure if he ever published it or not, but the thesis paper's around on global nomads. And in the small network at that stage of the guys who had reconnected via alumni on the internet, he sent out a questionnaire. And that was also one of the first realisations, to sit there and say, God, people like myself are also having relationship problems in life, struggling to assimilate, struggling to fit in, and you go through this thing, this is good, I am not alone. There is a network out there that supports me and people understand what my life was, what my life has been and what it's become. So, yeah, I don't know whether this is meant to give people advice or not, but if I could give anybody who wants to watch this, if you're here in Malaysia and you've got relationships and you're losing people, don't lose touch. And Peter's going to sit up the back and laugh because I never wrote a letter in my life. He wrote years and years and years and years, and I never replied. Don't ever lose touch of the people that are important to you in your life. To me, that's a key element. That's pretty much me and my time in Malaysia, I guess, the important things. So.